Welcome to this panel session, but it's going to be an inclusive panel session, so we're going to hope that you're going to contribute to our discussions as well. So I'm Alexander Bird. I'm the Bertrand Russell Professor of Philosophy. I'll just be chairing this session. The experts are over here and there. We've had contributed questions, lots of them, very interesting questions, and there are too many to get through one by one, sadly. But what I've done is to group them thematically. And what we're going to do is start with a general question for each of the panelists, who will introduce themselves as they answer the questions. And so the first question is, well, what does open research mean to us, or mean to you? Well, what's your interest in it? Why are you involved in it? What do you see as perhaps the advantages of open research, or possibly some of the challenges? Well, let's go down the panel, starting with you, Liz.
Thanks very much. Morning, everybody. My name is Liz Simmons, and I'm the university's head of research culture. Open research is obviously a really critical part of the wider research culture agenda. And for that reason, it's something important to me. And I work very closely with all of my colleagues here on the table, and many of you in the audience thinking about this. But just the question about what does open research mean to me, I feel like I'm going to give a slightly different answer to maybe a lot of people here and maybe in the room, because I'm coming at it from a very people-focused perspective, which is where we kind of drive research culture from. And for me, open research is, if we're going to be really open, it's about moving to a place where we're no longer doing it for the individual, but we are doing it for the team or for the good of society. And if we can move away from that place where everybody is always trying to get their own position moved forward, I think we could really bring some improvements in the way people work much more openly, because they wouldn't feel the need to be so protective of the information that they have. So that's my perspective. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Kira McNeice. I work at Cambridge University Press in our scholarly communications R&D team. So looking at all aspects of how the scholarly communications industry is evolving and changing. I'd say there's two aspects of open research that I think are important to me. And I think coming from the publishing perspective, of course, one of them is dissemination of research and open dissemination of research, making sure that the outputs of people's work, the outputs of research processes are as widely accessible as possible, especially publicly funded research, to make sure it's as much of a public good as possible, as many people as possible can access and read it and access it. And then the second aspect is openness of the research process itself. So again, as a publisher, we have an important interest in making sure that the research we publish is reproducible where that's applicable, to make sure that it's transparent, to make sure that it's reliable research. And so openness of the research process and making sure that how people came to their conclusions and what underlies the results that are put in a research publication, that those are transparent and open to anyone else who wants to look into how that research happened, is an important part of open research as well.
I'm Sasha Jones. I'm interim head of open research services at Cambridge University Libraries, and Kira's taken the 2 points that I was going to mention as well, but we're usually quite aligned, actually, I think, in some of our thinking. So just to expand on perhaps the first of Kira's points, open research to me is about making all of the research outputs that go into research openly available. So for that, it's not just open access publications and research articles, which kind of dominates conversations around this. It's about books, it's about conference proceedings, it's about methods and protocols, data sets, code, software, anything that goes into the research process that underpins perhaps that final piece, the research article. And yes, it's about the practice of how the research is conducted as well, so it's transparent. And just to say something on this, in case you in the audience are thinking about this, we often use that phrase, as open as possible, as closed as necessary. And I do think it's important to entertain that phrase, because it doesn't have to be binary between open and closed. It's like open, but something might need to be closed for kind of good, genuine reasons, whether it's to do with ethics or for legal reasons. but usually it's always possible to share something. So that could be the methods behind something. It could be a stripped down data set. That's okay. And other things may need to be closed for good reasons. In terms of the third thing I wanted to say was that in terms of our approach at Cambridge, we really want open research to be for everybody. So those practicing open research and sharing their findings, and also those that are reusing them as well. So it's not just about sharing stuff openly, it's also about sharing research outputs openly well, so that they can then be reused by others and built upon. So at some point in this panel, I might mention metadata a few times because I think that's just incredibly important for the reuse of research outputs and the discoverability of them as well. Yes, so I think open research is for everybody. It's for the funded, it's for the unfunded as well. So anyone conducting research. So that's quite important to what we're doing at Cambridge.
Hi everyone, I'm Luisa. I'm a PhD researcher, so here today to represent more generally early career researchers, and I'm also the chair of the Open Science Committee in my department, which is the MRC Cognition and Brain Sciences unit, so kind of both sides. And so when thinking what open research means to me, I think the answer is that open research means finding answers, which is what research and science mean more generally. If I'm gonna spend years, if not my entire career, looking for answers to the questions that I'm passionate about, which are questions about how can we help young people struggling with mental health problems, I want to make sure that I'm working in a framework that is unbiased and that helps me get closer to that truth that hopefully can then help people and society more generally. So building on these points there. So I think for me, open research has been instrumental in a way placing myself in the research process and making sure that all the biases that I might encounter, as we all do because we're humans, are in a way taken care of and tackled. It's hard to tackle them all, but I think open research can help us get closer by providing the tools and the values, such as the values of openness, of inclusivity, of access, that really allow us to get a bit closer, I think, to that grounding truth. So in a way, it helps me find a purpose in the work that I do. And I think that's why I've been so involved, not just in my own research, but also in delivering trainings to early career researchers and in teaching open science as well.
Good morning. I'm Anna Alexandrova. I'm a professor in philosophy of science, and although sometimes I function as an empirical researcher in that capacity, I have used the great services and help of our team, Kim and Lutfi, to make my survey data available. But really my interest in openness is more as a philosopher of science, because I'm interested in how culture of science and social sciences and humanities is changing, and how different definitions of openness would result in different changes, and whether that's good or bad. So Wittgenstein used the term family resemblance for concepts that don't really admit of a definition because they have really, really vague boundaries. Game was his example, but I think open research is a great example of a concept with a lot of family resemblance, but a lot of different agendas. People practice in different areas, undertake open science, for example, because they are very worried about credibility threats that result out of some unsavory revelations of poor research practices. People also do, and so in that sense, open research is, open science is a way of keeping people in line and creating better incentives. But for others, as we heard this morning, open research is all about fulfilling other ethical goals. For example, keeping academy accountable, keeping academy properly connected, fulfilling its public duty. And then there are further other motivations to do open science, such as, to create better infrastructure, to better account for all the service we do as scientists, reviewing, publishing, writing. And I think that is the challenge in talking about open science for all of us, to keep in mind how, depending on which tradition you are coming from, what you're going to demand is the case will be very different. And I, as a philosopher of science, often see quite strong tensions between those different demands. So I hope to learn from that, from today, about how to resolve them.
Thank you, Anna. I'm going to move now into some more specific sets of questions, and I'll ask some of the panelists to address them first, and then see what you, the audience, have to contribute. So this set of questions concerns developments in open research, how we can move the agenda forward, and how we get people, researchers, engaged in open research. I mean, we know from studies of science more generally that behavior of scientists and researchers more generally is influenced by incentive structures or disincentive structures, even. We need to bear those in mind. So the next set of questions are these. What would we like to see happening and developing in open research? Particularly, what would we like to see that would increase engagement with it? How would we encourage, in particular, early career researchers to participate in it? And how would we advise them to, for example, to go about applying for funding, and how looking for funding interacts with open research. And in particular, the early career researcher, but not only them, but particularly they're in a sensitive stage of their career where they put a lot of effort into something like open research. Is that properly rewarded? For example, is it rewarded by hiring and promotion criteria, or could it even be disincentivized by some of the attitudes amongst better established, more senior researchers? That's the heading of difficult conversations there. Or what can the university do? I mentioned promotions and hiring, but what about training and teaching? So perhaps we could address some of those topics. Not necessarily all of them, but perhaps I could start with you as an early career researcher. What are the incentives or disincentives, perhaps, and how does it feel from your career perspective?
Yes, so that was a lot, so I'm gonna try to tackle some of them. I think from the perspective of an early career researchers, there's definitely a lot of challenges when trying to apply open science principle to your research. The first one I can think of related to my research is front loading. When you pre-register, you do a register report, you try to make your code open. This is gonna require a lot of work before getting to your final results. And that means time spent where you're not going to have results, which might in turn affect your career, affect your networking, affect your possibility of meeting people and making progress. So that's definitely something I felt personally while trying to apply open science practices to my research, because I feel like sometimes I'm a bit stuck in the process of designing and thinking more than other peers. And that, and I asked myself, is that having a good or a bad effect on my career? Because in a way, I know that it's gonna have benefits long-term, hopefully, and it is gonna be recognized, and most importantly, is gonna help my science. But at the same time, I think a lot of early career researchers when they get to the choice point of deciding, am I gonna do this or not? Fairly enough, they ask themselves, like, is this actually gonna help me? And at what time point? Is it gonna help me short term or long term? And I think now a lot of the incentives that we have in place are helping career researchers maybe like more long term in terms of the research or the recognition that they're gonna get 2 years later down the line. But what can we do in the shorter term to help them, you know, apply those open science practices and feel that they're recognized and valued? So I think that's definitely one challenge that I've seen. Another one more broadly from my role in like chairing the Open Science Committee are the differences between labs, between disciplines, and between different departments at Cambridge in the way open science is incentivized. And oftentimes PhD students and postdocs that want to do open science come and ask me like, oh, how can I have like this difficult conversation with my PI that is not really supporting like making this data open or pre-registering because of fear of being scooped, for example, or other concerns. So what I see is that there's still a lot of disparities between labs, between departments, and there's not really a centralized way of dealing with them and providing guidance as well as training. Most of the training so far has come from early career researchers themselves, giving training to others. And I've invested a lot of time myself doing that. So I think now it's important to escalate that and think of how like higher order structure and the university can provide this training and take responsibility for some of it, and how that can help, I think, make open science more similar across different like bubbles, both when talking about labs, departments, and how they can talk to each other. So not really giving a lot of solutions there, but a bit provocatory.
Well, it certainly raises the questions and demands that make this an important event. So perhaps we move to you, Liz. What can the university do to support people in Louisa's situation?
That's a lovely question. The thing is, I think the university is trying to do things to support people in your situation, but it is very challenging in a large, very large, collegiate, democratic institution to translate the policies and the frameworks that we develop at the centre into practice that happens for everybody. And that's something we struggle with in every single agenda we're trying to change in the university, not just with open research. But if it's reassuring, the work that we are doing at the moment on researcher promotions pathways and the work that has been done on the academic career promotions process all now take into account open research practice as an indicator of positive contribution to the research environment. What's, I think, more challenging is getting away from the dominance of the research first before those contributions come into play. And so I think we've done in many ways as much as we can as an institution to show that we value in promotions exercises that they are important factors to consider. What we can't control is how promotions panels or individual PIs make decisions about how to value that. And also systemically, we're still in a place where ultimately everybody is measured by their output. And that's why you can, if you look at it from the other perspective, and I'm not defending this, I'm just saying that there are pressures on people when they have research grants to do things in a time frame, to deliver what needs to be done for the funder in time frame. And so I can see, if you have to put time into doing into processes that delay the critical outputs, then I can see why people might find it difficult to be supportive. And so I think partly it's helpful for people who are supportive to kind of gather support, like in any kind of process that you're trying to change, finding your allies and working together. And perhaps if it's difficult for an early career researcher to challenge their PI because of that power imbalance, finding another PI or in the department who is positive and coming at it from a different way, or if the head of department is on board, kind of working with culture change in that way. So I think that's important, but we'll have to work on it systemically as well. Just like we're working on research culture systemically, it's important that we get, for example, the funders and the publishers all on board. So we're all trying to move away from the disincentives which are making it difficult.
I will say briefly in terms of publishers being on board, yes, absolutely. We'd love to have all of our journals saying everything must be pre-registered, everything must have a data availability statement, but the problem is that we're at the very, very end of the research process. And if researchers haven't done that front loading, haven't done like the preparation for open practices, then it's very hard for us to go and say just at the end, go back and now sort out all of your data, because sometimes it's 5 years worth of data and they're just not going to be able to do it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So it has to be all of us working together. I totally agree.
Yeah.
We want to be on board as well. And we're doing what we can from our end, but yeah. It has to be funders as well. It has to be the universities, the hiring processes, the promotion processes, and the journals and the publishing end of it, all working together.
I can say something on the training element. Very difficult to get any training made mandatory in the university, and there is that piece about sometimes in this area we're talking in a bit of an echo chamber. And lots of the converts to open science, open research are PhD students, early career researchers. And we see it in, say, for example, our data champion community, which is about kind of research data management, but also data sharing as well. The vast majority of that community are, I think, sort of 65%, 70% are PhD students and postdocs. So there's a lot of interest within those communities. But there are internal battles as well that you mentioned, like in your opening bit and just now, that you've alluded to as well, within research groups. So there is the day-to-day culture change, cultural practices that need attention. Yes, there's kind of hiring kind of criteria, promotion criteria. We don't really know what the practices are in reality when people are scanning down a CV, do we?
No.
That's when we need some spice.
It has been suggested that an ethically approved study where we sit in on promotions panels could be suggested.
I support that. I think that is a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
But it's those day-to-day conversations of, I have the situation, I want to share my data, and someone's saying, oh, I don't know. It might damage your career, might damage the group, or so on. That can have a huge impact. So that's why I kind of relate this to training, because there's a huge amount of awareness. I'd love it if open research training was mandatory for all researchers across the university, from MPhils to research to senior professors, emeritus professors that are sitting on kind of lots and lots of data. I would love that, because it's about raising the awareness in this space. And yes, that'd be great. We do this year, actually delivered by Mandy, Dr. Mandy Vigdorovitz, we have kind of a new training in open research around the research life cycle, which is a bit different from what we've done before, where we've kind of embedded open research into existing training about research data management or publication practices, which we still do, but we're placing more attention on open research around the research life cycle, because that's really important, and it's thought about from before you begin your project, all the way to the end, and then afterwards as well. Yeah.
Super. Perhaps I'm certain that there'll be members of your audience who have thoughts about this, whether you're an early career researcher and what your experiences are, or indeed a senior researcher. So please, contributions, discussions, conversation. Or we can move on. but we'll have some time at the end for reflections. But I'd quite like this to be conversational.
People can put their hands up whenever anything comes to mind.
I mean, if during the course of what we're saying, just put your hand up when you think, oh yes, I'd like to contribute. Then it really is yeah, an open discussion about open research. So the next set of questions were concerned open research in relationship to publishing, to the role of libraries and data curation. So here's the questions. What should funders do about, or indeed researchers, about the increasing costs of publishing in gold for open access policy compliance? Is there a problem here with respect to inclusion, in particular, given inclusivity, given the increasing costs? As a question about the transformative agreements amongst universities and publishers. You know, are they good for open research? What role can librarians play in helping our objectives for open research, and you know, what do librarians need to be to make that possible? And then there's this interesting set of questions related to this about data curation. You know, what format should research be delivered in, so that it is genuinely open and machine readable, machine friendly? Do we need to harmonize our research practices, you know, across what are quite disparate disciplines represented here? Again, that's another enormous set of questions. Sasha, perhaps we could start with you.
Well, so many things in there.
Yes.
I've almost forgotten the first one, but
well, so let's
what are the questions?
start off with publishing, the cost of publishing gold, and whether that's whether that's good,
that's more
open, or against inclusivity because it's expensive.
Yeah. So, I mean, on the transformative agreements, I think from a researcher's perspective at Cambridge, it enables people that previously would not have been able to publish easily gold open access articles. So where the version of record is open access rather than kind of the accepted manuscript as green open access. It enabled the deals, the transformative agreements, the read and publish deals, enable that a lot more than they have done previously, and we see that in kind of the data we have in terms of publishing practices. But a lot of money goes into these transformative agreements, and we're in a privileged institution that's able to pay towards these at the moment. And so, no, they're not very inclusive at all. And it's, yes, it opens up, you know, our research outputs more broadly, but it's not facilitating other people to publish open access in kind of low income countries. So Stefania's and Rebecca's kind of graph before of some of the financial aspects behind this, you can predict what countries those are going to be. So in terms of the first one about what should funders be doing, and that is, well, investing in publishing practices that lie outside, quite frankly, these very expensive transformative agreements that rely on the big publishers. And then this is just facilitating these cultural problems of where you publish journal impact factors. Please let's ditch the importance of these entirely in any form of assessment. It's kind of is exacerbating that problem. So there's a recent consultation, I think the deadline is the end of this month, from Coalition S, which is a group of funders, and they have come up with a proposal, which you probably know more about than me, that is proposing actually more of a community-driven, research community-driven publishing ecosystem, and also infrastructure as well, which I think is really exciting to think of that as part of the future. And it's, you know, for my colleague here, it's not completely kind of denouncing publishing services and the benefits that those bring to our research outputs, but it's actually putting a little bit more of the control in terms of those who are producing the research and the research outputs. So I find that landscape particularly exciting, as long as it caters across all disciplines as well, because that's one thing that's really important to us here at Cambridge, is that, you know, we've got research happening across all sorts of disciplines, so arts, humanities, social sciences, and STEM subjects. So it's really important that we cater for everybody and include everybody.
Yeah,
If I could- Yes. So I think to start with, I would say that we are and we should be moving towards a world where research publication should be open access at the point of publication, zero embargo, free for anyone to read, anyone to reuse. That's where researchers want to be. That's what's best for the research communities. That's where we should all be aiming for. The question, and it is a very difficult question, is how to make that financially sustainable for everyone involved. So not just for publishers, but for academic institutions, for individual researchers, for funders. How do we make sure that the service that journals provide, and journals do provide a service to the academic community, how do we make sure that that is sustainable in this long-term future where we have everything open and everything accessible? And I think it's quite clear that there's going to be a diversity of business models. I know at Cambridge University Press, we're trying to move away from the APC, which is of course inequitable. It's, you know, not great for a lot of authors. Transformative agreements are a big part of what we're doing, but they're not going to be able to be the only part. And I think there's still a lot of scope for developing new business models beyond the transformative agreement, new initiatives like what we're trying right now with our Cambridge Open Equity initiative to help support authors who don't necessarily have funding from low and middle income countries. But I think the biggest thing at the moment is that we're trying to engage in conversations with all of the communities, all of the stakeholders. So researchers from different parts of the world, from different regions, subject areas, different funders, and making sure that we're talking and communicating about what the options are, what needs to happen, what we need to be thinking about, and how we can make publishing open access genuinely sustainable across the board for all researchers. So yeah, I don't have an answer for how to do that. We're trying to figure it out because, you know, we would like to be sustainable in long term as well. But yeah, it's a difficult one.
One thing that a number of my colleagues in the humanities are concerned about regarding sustainability is that amongst the stakeholders are scholarly societies, you know, many of whom generate their income from owning and curating and overseeing a journal. And what's the future for these kinds of institutions, which at the moment, certainly in many areas, the humanities provide an important function that's not the universities. Yeah, I'd be interested to know what the future for them is and what their future sustainability might be, and we don't know yet, as you say. There might be a whole range of models, but is there room enough to keep these institutions going? Again, audience, anything to contribute at this point? As I say, don't hesitate to raise a hand, either to ask a question or to express an opinion. And one thing we did that wasn't just raised in some of these questions is the issue of, I don't know whether we're in a position as a panel to answer this, about some data formats and how we can, is there a question, particularly in the more humanities and social sciences end of things, about how data, results, research generally, is the format of it makes it more accessible, or is that less of an issue than it just might be in some of the sciences where it's?
I can say something on that. Yeah, having seen that question before, I think it's a plea to not put data in supplementary kind of information, and a plea to use a trustworthy data repository. instead, because this is, you know, there are, I think, over 3,000 data repositories out there to choose from. Not all of them, for example, will mint persistent identifiers such as DOIs, which are really critical in terms of saying, this is my research output, this is my data set, this is a research output in its own right. And in terms of the format of that data, the machine readability of it, and also machine readable metadata, that is where repositories are incredibly important. So our institutional repository, Apollo, is such a trustworthy data repository. It's Core Trust Seal certified. And when you use a repository, for a repository like that, that's sort of certified, there is certain data curation checks that go in place. So you check the data set, you make sure that it's in formats that are open, that the data is readable, it's without errors, etc. And this is what the data team in the Office of Scholarly Communication does, like, daily, sort of checks these data sets. So there is a care that goes into curating data sets, research data sets, and it makes them fair, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So the short answer is use a trustworthy data repository for your data, and then everything will be fine.
Thank you, Sasha. Please.
Sorry, there's a microphone on its way to you,
Have a mic.
just for the people online.
Yeah, hi, I'm Agustina Martinez. I work very closely with Sasha's team at the library, and I wanted to expand a little bit about the formats, because the formats is really challenging, especially because different disciplines have very different types of data. But I think a quick win, and something that, you know, we can all agree on, is good quality metadata. Perhaps the data is very difficult to have a standard formats, putting in machine readable ways for some disciplines, but at least the good description of your data in machine readable ways can really help actually making that accessible. So just a little comment on that.
Yeah, I'd say good metadata isn't necessarily sufficient to make everything totally interoperable, but it is necessary.
That's very helpful. Thanks very much. Let me.
No, there's another question.
Oh, what's possible? Oh, sorry. Yes, good.
Is this on? Yes. Just to add to that point just then about machine readable data, I think what's equally as important is actually the reproducibility of that. And my experience, certainly of looking at academic programming, is that reproducibility is very, very not there. So I think there's a lot of training, perhaps, or mindset questions to be considered there. However, the point I really wanted to raise was about the previous point, which was the topic about open access publishing. I'm certainly very in favour of this newer model compared to the old thing, where the system where, you know, the public pays for the production of research, the creation of knowledge, and then has to pay to access it. I mean, I think it's inexcusable. However, I sort of look at it also at a slightly different perspective, thinking back to the first speaker of the conference who talked about copyright and so on. And it seems to me that knowledge production is not free. I've recently had a perspective of having to apply for a research grant in order to pay for an open access gold publication fee for an organisation outside the university. You know, so we're struggling to find, you know, £4,000 basically to be able to produce a peer-reviewed article, so it's then open access. That's money that has to be paid, and as you say, we're lucky in the university that we have a fund basically to do that. But I think for other institutions, whether that's organisations or people in developing countries and so on, there is a big question there. And I think just sort of the concept of that copyright should somehow be disapplied doesn't really cover the fact that there is still a cost. You know, peer review should have a cost. People should be paid for it, really. Hosting of journals, whether that's, you know, the sort of old-fashioned model that we currently have, or some sort of new distributor model, there's still a cost there. So I wonder how that cost can actually be sort of reflected in a world where we want everything to be free and open, but there's still a cost.
I guess I was at the Society of Scholarly Publishing New Directions conference a couple of months ago, and one of the things that came up is that what we're seeing with this shift to APCs is that publishing journals has become, it used to be a B2B, it used to be institutions would pay for subscriptions. Now it's become somewhat of B2C. The individual researchers are paying APCs, which also has its own problems, as you say. And yeah, I think that it's not a problem we've solved yet, because there are costs, as you say, associated with publishing, and there's an awful lot of behind the scenes stuff that gets factored into article processing charges, things like having a centralized technical team, having an ethics team that responds to ethical queries if someone challenges journal content, which we need to have experts to help. And as I say, I think journals are providing a service by doing all of these things. What services should be done by journals and by other parts of academic publishing or academic landscape in general. I think we're still teasing out the gray areas there. There are certainly APCs out there that are probably disproportionate to how much the actual costs are. So, how do we make sure that prices are transparent and reasonable and all that sort of thing? But yeah, again, in the end, it does come down to the fact that there are costs, and this does need to be financially sustainable for everyone involved, so that the individual researcher isn't hit with a bill for £4,000 that they don't have money to pay, but also so that the publisher can keep providing the services that we provide with journals, and so that the funders make sure they're getting value out of what they're funding in terms of research. Yeah, so again, don't think I have an answer for you, but it is definitely something that we're thinking about and aware of.
And just to add, there's increasingly growing discussion, I don't know if that's a phrase, but growing discussions about diamond open access publishing, where it's free to publish, free to read as well. And in certain countries, say Latin America, that's as far my colleagues can chip in here, know a lot more about this than I do. But that's where a huge proportion of academic publishing happens, is via diamond open access journals. Until we get to a point here where journal impact factors and journal titles, back to kind of research culture, you don't own the responsibility of all of the things, okay? But until we get to the point where that is not a criteria in terms of how individuals are assessed, that is the shift we've got to change for it to become easier to publish open access, and that is a huge sticking point. We often the conversations about this come round and round in circles around this. We're not going to solve it at this table here, but there need to be conversations within kind of research groups, within departments, during appraisals, for example, like how researchers are assessed. I don't know if you want to say anything about Liz, the narrative CV, and how this might fit into this, where we're talking about the different practices.
Yes, so the narrative CV, if people are not familiar with the concept, is a change in format of CV away from bullet pointed lists of I suppose hard metricized and kind of quantitative information, to a format that focuses more on narrative. And the format that's currently favoured by UKRI, so it's being widely adopted by UKRI in their grant applications and fellowship applications, it's called the Resume for Research and Innovation, and it asks you to talk about your contributions to research in 4 different perspectives. So your contribution to the actual generation of new knowledge, which is, I suppose, the bit that we focus hugely on at the moment when we look at things like publications and journal impact factors. But it asks you very much to talk about the context around that, what you have done, why it's important, and not to fall back on where it was published, for example. And then also the format of the CV asks you to talk about your contributions to supporting and mentoring colleagues into the research community that you work in. So that's a space where you can talk about, for example, the efforts that you make as a researcher to support open research practice, but other things that people contribute to as well in the kind of citizenship space and contributions to wider society. So it really starts to try and draw out a much more a much broader set of contributions. But of course, this is still, like many of the discussions we've had today, the onus is here on the researcher to repackage themselves, to do things differently. And we don't yet know if this really makes a difference to the people who are reading and making the assessments. And that's really the crunch point. It's the same as the point about the policies and the frameworks having open research practice, about being DORA signatories and having policies for that. You know, it's still all comes down to a very, very deeply ingrained cultural shortcut to see that something is published in a particular place and think, okay, we know that must be good. This person, in they come. And, you know, this is replicated in many other aspects of research culture. For example, looking at who a person is working with or which institution they're coming from and using that as a shortcut for an indicator of quality. So we do it in so many ways, and it's very difficult to kind of change that bit. So I think we're doing an awful lot to promote discussion, to raise consciousness about how to do it, but I think it's going to be a long change before we can really kind of unpick that instinctive behavior that people have to look for the things that they feel comfortable are their indicators of this person is good, this person is okay, good.
I wonder if there's any examples of institutions that are trying to do some of this by masking, for example, the place where paper is published or the institution where the person is coming from. Because I remember when applying to PhDs, there were universities where I wasn't allowed to say where I studied before, only what my grades were and what my research output was. And I guess that could be extended to research output as well, in terms of showing the output without the journal, although probably people will look you up and still have these biases. But I guess in some way the masking could help to overcome some of these problems.
There was a presentation I saw a while, and I cannot remember the research institutes, I'm sorry, but they were saying that they have a blanket policy, no journal names on slides.
Yeah.
Any DOI only, never put the journal name on your slide when you're reporting on here's the research I've published. So just to try and reduce the emphasis on journal name as a signifier of quality, which I thought was an interesting move in that direction.
That's interesting, actually, because that's, I mean, a lot of our policies and activities focus on promotions processes and the assessment processes, but actually the outward facing stuff that we do, I'm not sure that does our DORA policy, for example, suggest that as a potential? It's just an interesting which we'll make a note.
Can you hear me? Yeah, building up on this point, Liz, you made a comment earlier, you know, we can try and change the policy, but we cannot really change the decisions that, for example, people in a panel make when a promotion is applied for or an hiring committees. I wonder whether that is true, though, because some of us that have worked at other institutions, especially in the Global South for a long time, can tell you that there are mechanisms that exist to make sure that people are guided in their choices by guiding principles. I mean, I was in South Africa for 10 years before coming here, and obviously employment equity policy in the country is legislated, and obviously the university has to follow it. This doesn't exist here, but I don't see why a university with so many resources as Cambridge cannot think about creating policies around how mechanisms of selection happen, and they are not the usual mechanisms that we've been using, as they always like to say here, for the past 600-700 years. And they exist. I mean, just to give an example, in any panel in a South African university, there must be a representative of those communities that are always excluded from these decisions, that are those very young communities that are interested, for example, in open research and in changing things. So there must be a representative that comes outside the usual circles. There must be precise criteria that are looked at. So my question is, what really is it that is impeding us to do this? I suspect it's the same people that don't like things to change, but there must be a mechanism for doing this. Because every time we ask the same questions, every time we get the same answer, it is untenable, it is despicable that we continue doing things in the same manner, because it has so many consequences for so many things, our own careers, okay, and the careers of people that decide to do things differently, and open research itself, as we can see. I mean, there seems to be only one problem here, ultimately. It's decision-making and obviously money too.
I appreciate your frustration, and we do have those policies in place. We have checklists, we have guidelines, we have training, and as Sasha was saying, it's very difficult to make anything mandatory in this environment. But I think we do have to recognise the challenge to move away from personal bias. You know, we're all very enlightened, I would imagine, in this room, and we would probably try our absolute hardest in a situation to really judge people fairly. But you do still, it takes a huge amount of conscious effort not to fall back on things that are comfortable and familiar and safe for yourself. And I think that's what we're facing a challenge with, that the things have been done a particular way, and it's very uncomfortable for people to do things a different way. And I'm not saying that we won't ever get there, but it's just not a quick change.
I wonder, like, how do the policy, like the change in the policies and in the system of this sort happen, and why is it so hard to introduce like mandatory things? Like, is it because of like the different people that are involved in the decision making? Because I guess something like having a representative of a certain group in the panel could already be like a big step. There have been times that I've been interviewed by like 4 men, and of course that's gonna put me in a disadvantage. So even such policies, of course, they're not gonna solve the whole issue, but can definitely make a difference. I wonder what are like the blocks, what is blocking like us from like trying to implement those changes, and if something can be done about it.
Yeah, and I think that kind of practice of having diverse panels, having panels at all, is something that we're really trying to work on. But ultimately, academics are their own boss.
So
And culturally,
yeah.
you know, they run their own programs in the STEM subjects. They run their own research groups, and they bring in the money to do that. Therefore, they have some level of being able to say, I'm going to do it this way. And this is it's the endless problem in the university of going and saying, we'd like this to be done this way, but if you need to do it slightly differently in your department, that's okay, we'll respect that. And if you need to do something slightly differently in your research group, and it's really, you get a lot of backlash if you come and say this must be done this way. The reaction will be, well, we're not going to do it at all then. And it's so frustrating. We could go on for another hour about this.
We could, but we can't. We could in one sense, but sadly we can't because of timing. But I think that was a nice point at which to finish. And we started with talking about open research, but ended up talking about how issues of inclusion and equity are tightly bound up with these questions. And so I hope the conversations that we've been having here on these topics I know that they will continue and develop. So thank you very much to the panel.